welcome to Mysterious Events, Episode 2. I'm your host, Stephen A. Mackay, a writer and podcaster with a lifelong interest in the strange and unexplained. Today I thought we'd take a look at one of Scotland's most mysterious locations, Boleskine House, a place which was once home to the 20th century's most infamous occultist, Aleister Crowley, and later Jimmy Page of rock titans Led Zeppelin. There's been a lot written about Boleskine over the years, with hauntings and strange tales said to be attached to the house, so let's take a closer look and see if any of these legends stand up to scrutiny. Boleskine House is 21 miles south of Inverness, and besides Loch Ness, with its famous monster. The parish of Boleskine was formed in the 13th century, and a church and graveyard being built in the same period. People were more open to magic and strange events in Scotland, indeed in the whole world back in those times, and in the 17th century a minister, which is a clergyman, apparently had to deal with an outbreak of zombies. A local necromancer was said to have raised the dead bodies in the Boleskine graveyard, and it fell to Minister Thomas Houston to get them safely back into the ground. No idea how one goes about such a task. If anyone listening knows, share it with the rest of us. Around the same time, the church caught fire during Mass and burnt down, killing everyone inside, according to legend at least. Of course, with the place being so ill-omened, you'd think no one would ever want to do anything with the land, wouldn't you? But no, someone thought it would be the perfect place to build a hunting lodge, right in the site of the church that had burned down. Colonel Archibald Fraser, fine Scottish name there, erected Boleskine House around 1760, right where all those people had died. Over the next 70 years, Fraser's family extended the lodge until it boasted 4 bedrooms, a kitchen with a servant's bedroom over it, a lounge, drawing room and a library. And just to add to the spooky, eldritch atmosphere, they even dug a tunnel linking the house to the graveyard. Supposedly. In 1899, the house was bought by its most notorious owner, Aleister Crowley. If you don't know who Crowley was, he was brought up in a strict Christian household, but rebelled against the faith, throwing himself into what he called magic, with a K, and getting up to all sorts of stuff, which seems fairly tame by today's standards, but was frowned on back then. So feared was he, in fact, that his own mother dubbed him the Great Beast 666, and the tabloids called him the wickedest man in the world, even though Hitler and the mass murdering Nazis were around during his life. Clickbait headlines aren't a new thing, eh? Anything to sell newspapers. I won't get into Crowley in detail here. Maybe I'll do an episode on him in the future. Suffice to say, he wasn't the nicest person, but he wrote some incredibly interesting and influential books on things like yoga and magic that are worth checking out. If you'd like to find out more about his incredibly interesting life, I recommend Lawrence Sutin's Do What Thou Wilt and Richard Kaczynski's Perdurabo. I'll put links to those books in the show notes. So, anyway, Crowley was interested in performing magical rituals, and Boleskine House was ideal for a series of operations known as the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This ritual required a house in a secluded location with a door opening to the north. Outside this door should be a terrace covered with fine river sand, leading to a lodge where the spirits could congregate. The sand was so you could see their footprints as they moved about. Spooky stuff, eh? What was the evil purpose of this horrific black magic? Well, it was to invoke one's holy guardian angel. Not quite as sexy or naughty as invoking Satan, eh? Oh wait, you did need to summon the 12 kings of hell in Crowley's ritual, so I guess that was pretty bad. But hang on, it was to bind them and remove their negative influence from the magician's life. So that's good, right? Anyway, whatever. The sacred magic of Abramelin would take 6 months to carry out, and Crowley got stuck into it, but while he was in the midst of the ritual, he was called to Paris by Samuel MacGregor Mathers, leader of the Golden Dawn. Crowley wasn't the most conscientious guy, and he never bothered to banish all those demons he'd summoned at Boleskine before he buggered off to France, leaving the kings of hell to do what they liked, basically. Crowley's lodge keeper, Hugh Gillis, looked after Boleskine while he was away, but Gillis suffered a number of misfortunes and tragedies, including the unexpected deaths of his children, leading Crowley to admit his magical experiments had got out of hand. Later, he fell out with Samuel Mathers, the Golden Dawn head, and the two began a magical war against one another. Mathers in Paris, Crowley at Boleskine, throwing astral missiles at one another over the miles. In his Confessions autohagiography, a hagiography is a biography of a saint, if you weren't aware, which is just hilarious when you think of Crowley calling his own book that. Anyway, in his Confessions, Crowley claimed that Mathers had, with his magical attacks, killed the Boleskine hunting dogs and made the servants ill. There was also an attack on Crowley's wife Rose. This wasn't just an astral attack, it was by a workman who went suddenly crazy for no apparent reason, and Crowley had to fight him off with a fishing gaff, which is a short heavy pole with a spike on it. That would do some damage. Crowley wasn't really a guy who liked to settle down in one place for very long, and he didn't actually spend all that much time at Boleskine before he sold it and moved on in 1913. Later, after World War II, a Major Edward Grant bought the house, but in 1960 he shot himself in the head with a shotgun, killing himself in Crowley's old bedroom. His dog apparently ran out of the room with a piece of his skull in its mouth and carried it to the housekeeper. This only added to the dark legends that swirled about Boleskine House. Possibly not adding to those legends, at least in my opinion, is the tale of the next owners of the ill-fated house. This was a married couple, and the wife was blind. After a short time of living in the house, apparently its dark atmosphere got too much for the man, and he buggered off one day, leaving his wife wandering around unable to see. I'm not really sure why this is included in the history of the house, as if it's some mysterious event. Newly married guy gets bored living out in the sticks with his new wife and pisses off, leaving her wondering what's going on. Sure, it's probably more wicked than anything Crowley ever did there, but I don't think you can pin it on the after effects of devil worship. And that brings us nicely to our next owner, famous Satanist Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. I'm joking, he's obviously not a Satanist, no matter what some of the wilder internet wackos will tell you, but he was hugely interested in Aleister Crowley, which is why he bought Boleskine House in 1971. I've read an unsubstantiated rumour that Page believed there was a secret underground temple used by Crowley beneath the house, and Page tried to find it without much success. Most people believe he bought the estate as a quiet retreat, a place to write songs in. I suppose something like he did at the little cottage called Bronny Roar in Wales, where he and Robert Plant wrote some of my favourite Zepp tunes. In truth though, Page spent little time at Boleskine. It was something of a wreck when he bought it, both the house and the grounds, and he hired a guy called Malcolm Dent to live there as caretaker. Poor Malky probably thought he was walking into a dream job, but it didn't quite turn out like that. Malcolm wasn't a great believer in the paranormal, but a few weeks after moving in, he heard weird noises in the hall that stopped whenever he investigated. He asked the help, as Jimmy Page called them, servants I assume, why they didn't let the cats out at night, since that's what Malcolm thought the noises were, and the help told him that the noises he was hearing were supposedly the decapitated, ghostly head of a guy called Lord Lovat, who was the father of the original builder of the house. Lord Lovat had been executed hundreds of years before for treason, but that happened in London, so yeah, weird story. Jimmy Page was asked in an interview, "You have no contact with any of the spirits?" And he replied, enigmatic as ever, "I didn't say that. I just said I didn't hear the head roll." Other scary stuff happened to Malcolm Dent when he was living there as Jimmy Page's caretaker though. Doors would slam, and carpets would be mysteriously pulled up during the night, and one night, when he was in bed, Dent heard something snuffling under the door. I imagine it like a dog. You've probably heard that sound when your dog's sniffing under your door. But this got louder and louder, and the door started to shake violently. Understandably, Dent felt like some evil monster was trying to get into him, but as quickly as it started, it just stopped. Apparently this bedroom was the one that Crowley had conducted his Abramelin ritual in. Another night, Dent claimed a porcelain figurine of the devil levitated into the air and then smashed itself into pieces in the fireplace. Who's got a porcelain figurine of the devil just lying about their fireplace? Anyway, despite all these spooky things happening, Malcolm Dent met his wife when he was living at Boleskine and brought up his kids there. Maybe it was a dream job after all. I also read, this is another rumour, that Malcolm had been renting the place out to curious Crowley fans, taking a nice wedge of cash off them for the privilege, but not telling Jimmy Page about it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought it was quite an amusing story. So Jimmy Page owned Boleskine for over 20 years, until 1992, and he didn't spend much time there. It'd be great to know if he personally had any weird experiences there, but Jimmy is notoriously tight-lipped about things like this. He's open about the fact he admired Crowley, but that's about it. And that's part of the fun with Jimmy Page. He's a real man of mystery. One experience he had at Boleskine was shared with us all though. As anyone who's seen the concert movie The Song Remains the Same will know. Jimmy's fantasy sequence during Dazed and Confused was filmed at Loch Ness, right behind Boleskine, adding yet another layer to the house's mythology. Incidentally, Gibson have just released a brand new version of the double neck guitar Page used in The Song Remains the Same. You'd have to sell your soul to Satan to be able to afford one. It's $50,000. No wonder Jimmy can afford to buy houses like Boleskine. I guess I'll just pretend I'm him with my old Les Paul Classic. After Jimmy sold the house in 1992, it was converted into a hotel, then sold again and used as a guest house, and it seems there were no scary experiences reported for the next 20 plus years until the place burned down. Just before Christmas in 2015, a fire started, somehow, in the kitchen, destroying 60% of the house. The Daily Express newspaper reported on it with a fantastic headline, "Highland home which belonged to Led Zeppelin star Aleister Crowley goes up in flames." Superb journalism there, huh? There was another fire in 2019, doing even more damage to both the main house and a second building on the estate. These fires were set deliberately, although I don't think anyone was ever charged for it. Now, in 2024, the estate is owned by the Boleskine House Foundation, a charity with the main objectives of restoring and preserving the estate. They post regularly on Facebook with updates on their work to bring the place back to its former glory. Check out their page, the link is in the show notes, along with others you might find useful. So, that was a very quick overview of the history of Boleskine House. I think people find the place interesting mainly because it was owned by Aleister Crowley and Jimmy Page, two very interesting characters. Crowley was a renowned self-publicist who often exaggerated wildly. He would claim to have made himself invisible and things like that, and I'm quite sure he did that in his tales about Boleskine. Most of the lore from his time living in the house comes from his own biography, or as he called it, the autohagiography, the Confessions of Aleister Crowley. Stories of his housekeeper, who'd been teetotal for years, having a big boozing session, going mental and trying to murder his family, like in The Shining, and another about Crowley scribbling an occult symbol on a butcher's receipt, only for the poor butcher to then slice through his own artery and die. How true were these stories? Who knows? For the sake of the victims, hopefully they're fictional, or at least greatly exaggerated. But Crowley did enjoy telling stories, and I particularly enjoyed this one, recounting Lawrence Sutin's biography of him called Do What Thou Wilt. While he was living at Boleskine, Aleister wrote a terse letter to the Vigilance Society in London, complaining that the prostitution in this neighbourhood is most unpleasantly conspicuous. So the society sent one of their representatives to investigate, but he found nothing. They communicated their findings to Crowley, and he replied by postcard, "Conspicuous by its absence, you fools!" For a man that was apparently more evil than Hitler, this seems amusingly childish. And Jimmy Page? Led Zeppelin are one of the greatest bands ever, with classic songs like Kashmir, Whole Lotta Love, No Quarter, and of course, Stairway to Heaven. Page was the main man in the band, producing all the records as well as playing guitar and co-writing most of the songs. He was also famously enigmatic, often hinting at his interest in the occult, with his Zoso symbol on albums and amplifiers, the meaning of which was never explained, and even having Crowley's misunderstood motto, Do What Thou Wilt, engraved in the vinyl of Zepp's third album. Like Crowley, he was a superb self-publicist, and exactly the type of edgy celebrity that draws attention and interest, so of course his ownership of the haunted mansion would raise eyebrows and inspire wild headlines. Does the fact that later owners of Boleskine said nothing weird happened while they were there, and that it was a really lovely place to live, prove the legend is a load of nonsense? Nah, of course not. Maybe the devils that Crowley summoned had finally returned to their own plane by that point. Or maybe, like guitar shop staff all over the world, the devils simply get tired of Stairway to Heaven being played repeatedly, and the piper led them to reason. Well, that's it for this second episode of Mysterious Events. A little bit shorter one this time. To be honest, I couldn't really find that much other than the usual old stories. I did search around the internet, asked the Boleskine House Foundation if they had any spooky stories, and even Richard Kaczynski, and there's not really much other than what's already out there. I mean, if you've got any good stories that you've heard of, especially from the locals that have maybe visited the area or have lived there for years, please pass them on to me and I'll add it to the episode at a later date. That'd be great. For now, if you're enjoying the show and you'd like to support us with the running costs, you can buy me a coffee at the link in the show notes. Any amount is appreciated, no matter how small. And if you'd like to hear more of my Scottish accent while you wait for the next episode of Mysterious Events, check out Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast that I co-host with best-selling author Matthew Harvey. The link is in the show notes, again. We've interviewed amazing guests like Bernard Cornwell, Simon Scarrow, CJ Box, Dan Jones, and even rock stars like Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson and Todd Kearns from Slash's band. So there's plenty of great stuff to dig into. Cheers all, and until next time, seek the mysteries.